and welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is Magic Rules that I might be getting wrong. That's right, I'm continuing on my series of Magic Rules interactions that people might be getting wrong, but today I will be focusing on ones that I actually got wrong, and I'm going to be covering a few things in this video. First of all, I'm doing this video, of course, because I'm covering those rules interactions that people might be confused about, so there will be some clarifications in this video, but also I'm pointing out, even someone like me that has been playing the game for a very long time can tend to get things wrong. And in fact, sometimes if you've played the game for a long time, it actually can be a little bit of a disadvantage because they're changing the rules all the time, right? So as they change the rules, they don't usually make huge announcements about this kind of stuff. And sometimes you can get it wrong because you're doing it the old way things used to be done. In fact, I've had a few people comment in my Magic Rules videos that they didn't know. They've been playing the game for 20 years and they had no idea that that rule was changed. So sometimes it can make things a little more difficult for the players that have been playing for a long time if you don't keep up. And these specifically are rules that I will be covering here that I got wrong on videos that I have made. That's the other sort of interesting part about this video, giving you a little bit of insight of how it works. It's a tough one making these videos, right? Because you post these videos and you've done a rules interaction wrong. People point it out in the comments and kind of makes you look bad. It happens to the best of us, of course. None of us are perfect. And yes, just so you guys know, you can edit your videos afterwards, which I have done. After you've uploaded your videos to YouTube, there is an option where you can go and edit out little parts. If you got something particularly wrong, very wrong, in fact, you can edit out that part so it's not there. And yes, I have done that quite a few times. And if you go check out some of these videos that I'm going to be talking about here today, you will see where I did that. Okay, so hold on a second. I have to do a little bit of an insert here because funny enough, right after I recorded this video, there was another rules change where there wasn't a great big announcement. In fact, it was brought to my attention by one of my patrons, and it is a pretty significant one, and again, sort of makes me look bad on another one of my videos. So I am actually inserting this part of the video into the rest of the video that I already recorded. I just made a video a couple of weeks ago about wrong cards in decks like I do, and I had talked about Magar Magic Strings, a commander I've talked about quite a bit on my channel actually, because people had asked about creating token copies of the cards that Magar is putting face down on the battlefield. And what I said in that video is transform is not a copyable effect. When you create a token copy of a transform card, you only get the face up version. There are other things that are not copyable. So for example, if I create a token copy of a tapped creature with my Cackling counterpart, that token will enter the battlefield untapped, right? Tapped is not a copyable effect unless the card specifically says it enters the battlefield tapped and attacking, for example, right? Now, the reason I got to talk about this is because they changed this rule, funny enough, just recently with March of the Machine, mostly because of those incubate tokens, right? Those incubate tokens are actually kind of unique in that they are face down artifacts that you are then transforming. You're putting counters on them. Even though they're doing all the things we've seen before in the game of Magic, we haven't really seen it in that combination. And I think it is because of that reason that they decided to change the rules on how copying a transform creatures work. And essentially how it works now is you can copy transform creatures. So again, I'll use Kiki-Jiki, the most famous version of this. I got a transform creature. I have my Kiki-Jiki. I can copy it. And typically what would have happened before is you would only get the face up version, or you would only get the version that you see on the table. Now you get both. So you can copy that creature and then before it goes away, do whatever you need to do to flip it over. And it will actually flip over. So now we have essentially transforming tokens, which is kind of weird and does kind of confuse things. Again, sort of more confusion coming out of this set. On top of all the other interactions we have, now we're getting rule changes as well. Again, some that people might not even be aware of. Like I literally just said earlier at the start of the video, they don't exactly make huge announcements with these kinds of things. If you're looking for them, they do. I know there's a lot of people watching this video that thought it was fairly obvious because they're out there watching all the content and picking up on this stuff. A lot of people don't though, right? A lot of people, for them, this game is sort of a part-time endeavor and they just like to play Magic, and these rules changes sort of fly under the radar for them. So it is incredibly ironic that I recorded this video last week and now I have to put this little insert in here because of a Magic rules changed that now essentially I'm wrong about because I made a video a couple of weeks ago talking about it. All right, back to the original video. So I'm going to start out at the very beginning, not really the very beginning, but one of my earliest videos, which is the video where I talked about all of my personal decks, the original video where I did that anyway. And I had an interaction there with my Questing Beast deck and Kusari-Gama that was incorrect. And this is kind of my own fault in a way, where I actually was playing that deck and I had someone that I was playing with make this suggestion for me. They said, oh man, Kusari-Gama, fantastic fit in that deck. And Kusari-Gama is a fantastic fit in a lot of decks, but the interaction that I specifically talked about in that video didn't actually work. Kusari-Gama says when equipped creature deals damage to a blocking creature, it deals that much damage to each other creature defending player controls. And what I said in that video is, well, my Questing Beast has Death Touch, so when it becomes blocked, it's going to deal damage to each other creature. And because it has Death Touch, it's going to kill all those other creatures because, of course, Death Touch means any amount of damage is going to destroy that creature. But that's not the case here, right? You got to read the wording on the card. It says Kusari-Gama deals that much damage to each other creature defending player controls. So it's actually the equipment. If I have this on my commander and I attack with it, it's going to deal 4 damage to all of those other creatures, but the Death Touch does not apply. Now, it's still a pretty good card. In fact, it's a good card in a lot of decks where you either want your commander to be blocked or maybe don't want it to be blocked, right? Because of course, if they block your commander, now it's going to deal damage to all their other creatures as well. It's a fantastic equipment. It doesn't work as good as I had hoped, and I did end up taking it out of that deck because the interaction I was specifically looking for did not work. And yes, I had a bunch of people point it out in the comments when I originally posted that video. Wasn't too happy about it, so of course I had to take it out. Another interaction that has maybe changed over time is auras. You know, there's a lot of maybe rules interactions that people don't understand entirely about auras. And when I did my original spoiler video for Killian Ink Duelist, I had mentioned that, right? Spells you cast that target a creature cost 2 less to cast. And I thought, does this work with auras? Because I actually wasn't quite sure if an aura is targeting, and of course it is. Now, the specific interaction here that people might be confused about is when you cast an aura, of course it is going to be targeting, so you have to choose the target. And I had mentioned in a lot of other rules clarification videos that if something is targeting, it will say target on it. However, auras is the one exception there where it doesn't actually say target, and it is targeting. When you cast your aura, it will target the creature that it is enchanting. So of course it does work with Killian Ink Duelist, and the cost will be reduced. And a lot of people obviously are doing that in their Killian Ink Duelist decks. However, where things get a little confusing is with a card like Zur the Enchanter, for example, right? When Zur goes and gets auras out of your deck, right? It's going to search your deck for an enchantment card that is 3 mana value or less and put it directly into play. And of course, that can be an aura. A lot of people will go get auras to put on their Zur so that it's a little harder to kill. And in that case, you're actually not targeting. So what you can do is if you have an aura already on your commander that say gives it Shroud, that means it can't be targeted by anything, but you can still use the ability to go get an aura, put it directly into play, and it will slide onto your commander without actually targeting it. I know it seems a little bit confusing, but that is the way it works. Another thing you can do is in, say, a Brago deck, you can be blinking any auras you have, and a card that people play very often in their Brago decks is Reality Acid. That is an enchant permanent with Vanishing 3, and what you can do is you can blink your Reality Acid, and it says, when Reality Acid leaves the battlefield, enchanted permanent's controller sacrifices it. So when you blink it, they have to sacrifice that permanent, then it comes back into play and you can slide it onto something else, and it is not targeting. Because it is not being cast, it is entering the battlefield in another way. It's not actually targeting anything, so you can slip your Reality Acid onto something that has hexproof or Shroud. That actually does work. So a little bit confusing. I myself was confused about it. I hope that clarifies it for everybody. Sometimes auras will be targeting, particularly when you cast them, and sometimes they will not. Moving on to another older video I did where I talked about my Vadrok deck, and I recently mentioned this in a Wrong Cards video that I did where I talked about Blighted Agent in a Brokos deck, right? Because of course, Blighted Agent is a human, so your Brokos will not mutate onto it, right? That is the mistake I made. I had made a Vadrok deck and I had Swiftblade Vindicator in there. And when I talked about that deck on my channel, of course, I talked about this interaction because I thought, well, double strike, vigilance, and trample, that's a great creature creature to mutate onto, because of course it's going to be flying, double strike, vigilance, trample, and a 3/3 sounds pretty good, but of course Swiftblade Vindicator is a human, so that does not work. You can't mutate onto humans, right? So not a great include. If anyone out there has Swiftblade Vindicator in their Vadrok deck, I'm afraid you probably might want to take it out. That interaction does not work. Another rules clarification, and this is again is something that I didn't know. I actually talked about this in a rules video and I got it wrong because I didn't know they had changed it. I had talked about at the beginning of upkeep triggers and how usually almost always that is the first time on any turn where things are going to be happening, where the stack is going to be used. I talked specifically about the inspired ability and I said that's the only exception where things are going to be happening during untap, because the inspired ability happens when your creature gets untapped, right? King Makar the Gold Cursed, for example, says whenever it becomes untapped, you may exile target creature. If you do, create a gold token. So your thinking is here, when your creature untaps is during the untap step, so that's when this ability is going to trigger and go on the stack. And I was corrected in that video. I did not actually know this. That doesn't happen during untap. Yes, your creature will untap during the untap step, of course, but that ability actually doesn't go on the stack until your upkeep. Nothing can happen during untap. The stack doesn't get used during the untap step. So if you have any inspired creatures or anything that happens when a creature becomes untapped, that in fact goes on the stack at the beginning of your upkeep, not on untap. That's a rule I was not aware of. That was clarified by my viewers in the comments, so thank you for that. I appreciate things being clarified for me as well. Another interaction that was changed in the time that I've been playing Magic is with blocking creatures, and I think I've talked about this in another video as well. And again, some older players might not be aware of this, okay? The way things used to work with blocking creatures is if I had a blocking creature and I chose to block with it, and then after blockers were declared, I tapped that creature to use its ability. So say I had an Arcanist the Omnipotent, I block with it, and then I tap it to draw 3 cards because it's gonna die in combat because it's blocking a big creature. So I want to draw those 3 cards before it dies. When damage is resolved, my Arcanist will not be doing any damage because tapped creatures didn't deal damage in combat. But they changed that rule. That is no longer the case. Tapped creatures now do deal that damage. So if I block a creature with my Arcanist the Omnipotent and then I tap it in response to the declare blockers and draw the 3 cards, when damage is done on the damage step, it will still deal that 3 damage to the attacking creature. If that actually makes a difference or not, it can be very relevant, of course. So if you're still hanging on to that old way of how they used to do things, no longer the case. Tapped creatures do indeed deal damage during combat. And the last one I'm going to talk about here, which again is one that I completely got wrong because I actually didn't know how this interaction worked. And I had someone ask me this about Deflecting Swat and Counterspell in one of my videos that I then clarified in another Magic Rules video, and I got wrong. It actually doesn't work the way that I thought it did. How is it that your Deflecting Swat can counter a counterspell? You know, how does this interaction work essentially, right? I cast a spell, my opponent wants to counter it, and in response, I cast that Deflecting Swat so that my original spell doesn't get countered, right? How does this interaction actually work? I actually had this come up in a game recently with some of my patrons on my Discord where we had to clarify this, and of course, it had been clarified for me, so now I understand exactly how it works. Originally, what I had said in that video is, well, you cast a Deflecting Swat and you change the target of the counterspell because, of course, counterspell is actually targeting something, and Deflecting Swat says you may choose new targets for the target of spell or ability, so I change the target of the counterspell to itself, so it ends up countering itself. That is not how it works, and the reason why it doesn't work that way is because spells can't target themselves. It is not possible for a counterspell to target itself. That's the rule. So you have to figure out a way to make this work where the counterspell can't target itself, but you don't want it targeting the original spell you cast. So, of course, what's left? The only thing left on the stack that your counterspell can target is the Deflecting Swat, right? So how this is going to work is I cast the Deflecting Swat, and the counterspell's original target, of course, is the spell I want to save. And in order to do so, I have to change the target of the counterspell to my Deflecting Swat. So now the counterspell is countering the Deflecting Swat, and I know this gets really confusing because you think, okay, well, if the counterspell has countered the Deflecting Swat, then the Deflecting Swat's no longer doing anything, so shouldn't the counterspell go back to, no, it doesn't work that way because, of course, the counterspell has already resolved. So the counterspell can no longer counter the original thing that you've countered because it is resolved in countering the deflecting swat, which also already resolved. So essentially what's happening here is you're sort of fizzling the counterspell, right? Because the deflecting swat will resolve, change the target of the counterspell, which now no longer has a legal target because the deflecting swat has resolved. So now it essentially just fizzles. And then once it fizzles, of course, your original spell will resolve like it normally does. That's how all of that works. I know it can be confusing, but I'm sure a lot of people see this interaction happen in games all the time and are wondering exactly how it works. And a lot of people might be doing it incorrectly. That is the correct way that it works. So again, rules clarifications that I originally got wrong that were clarified for me, and now I am clarifying it for all of you as well. I hope I got it all right this time, or I might have to make another video like this. Again, this is the most complicated game on the planet. Things can get confusing. That's why I like to make videos like this. Let me know in the comments below if you have any other magic rules clarifications you might want me to go over. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.